Hi everybody. I wanted to post this brief video about how to think and act like a gerontologist. So it goes along with your introduction video about what we're going to be doing this semester. So if you remember this slide from the introduction video, what I'm going to be asking you to do is a bunch of different assignments and tasks that are all going to help reach the ultimate goal of being able to think and act like a gerontologist, right? So that's what we want you to be able to do. That's what we hope and strive to do in our profession as well. So let's unpack this a little bit. Remember, I promised that I would tell you about each of these pieces more in more specific detail, because if you can do the three things that are represented in these circles, you will be able to think like a gerontologist and therefore act like a gerontologist as well. And then that coincides to all of the different tasks and assignments I'm asking you to do will feed into you being able to use these three circles well. So first of all, the biopsychosociocultural model. So when we think about aging, we used to think of it in a very unipolar way, which means it was the medical model or a one dimension model. So it was all about the biological, this top part here. We looked at, how the brain processes and neurochemicals. We looked at brain function and structure. We looked at your body and how it can function and what physical disease you may have. We looked at your genetics and, your fitness level, what kind of health behaviors you have. And this was all that we thought about aging. So we could define aging as your biology, what your biology could tell us. You have this much disease. You are likely to live this long. You have this going on in your brain and this going on in your body. So that was our sort of unidimensional way to look at most everything in health, but in particular aging. So in the late 70s, someone named George Engel proposed the model of the biopsychosocial model. And nowadays, it's more of a sociocultural look because we want to make sure that in that social part, we're looking a little bit broader. And he proposed this because he said, we're looking at this too narrowly. There's much more to health, and in our case, aging, than just your biology. Your biology can tell us quite a bit, but there are other parts that are missing to that picture. So on top of whatever is going on in your brain, your body, we want to know what's going on in your mind, or what are your internal experiences that affect your aging. So for instance, did you know that the way that you think about aging affects your longevity or how long you live? So we have experimental studies to prove that the way in which you think about aging, whether it's more of a negative or a positive way, affects how long your lifespan or how long you will live, which directly relates up to the biological, right, and how many years you have in your life. So that's one example. But also the way that we think about aging, or the way we perceive aging, whether positive or negative, affects the way we think on a daily basis, our cognitive health. It affects the actions that we take and our other emotional experiences as well. So this mind part, is really a powerful part of aging, and what we think and feel and how we behave. And that's part of that psychological sphere. So what are the thoughts that are going on? What's your mindset or approach to things? What's your emotions and inner states of being or experiences, down to values and character strengths and all of those things on the psychological side that affect your experience of aging. So we will be talking about that dimension as well as the biological. And the third dimension that's also very important is the context, right? So all of these things happen within a context, and that's the sociocultural part. It's partially about relationships, the type of social network that you have, the who is in your life, and what are the quality of those relationships. So also a did you know moment. Did you know that the quality of your social network and social relationships affects your life's longevity as well? So the more robust your social network, the better it is, you will live longer. And we know that with large-scale data studies that have proven this phenomena again and again, that your social relationships affect how long you live and also your health and well-being. So, these are all connected to each other. And not only just about your relationships, but again, that context, the environment in which you lived, the cultural norms in which you grew up by are going to affect your experience of aging, not only what you think about it, but it will affect your health in that the foods that you eat, the norms around physical activity and behavior and smoking and all of those things that you learned about health and aging that come from your cultural context will affect your experience of aging. And also important in that is just your physical or built environment, right? So that is part of the cultural context, are the environments that you have been exposed to. So we know a lot about exposures of chemicals or toxins in your environment and how they will affect both you biologically and psychologically, and certainly will affect your health and how you age. So those are some interesting perspectives that we'll also be looking at when we look at these different concepts in aging. So that all to say that the biopsychosociocultural model is one of the three prongs that you will need in order to think like a gerontologist, because when we go over all of these topics in aging, each one of them will have key components of the biopsycho and social model, and we'll be pushing ourselves to think about each of those concepts from those perspectives. The second of the three is a life course perspective. So you've probably heard about this before, right? So life course theory, you've heard about an intro to gerontology as well. But the idea around the life course perspective is that instead of having an older adult, say a 66-year-old male, come into your office and say, doc, I have this problem, or I need physical therapy for this, or my dental health isn't great, and that's a snapshot of time. So we have that 66-year-old male right then and there. But the life course perspective says, what are all of those things in childhood, early adulthood, middle age, and now that you're at advanced age that you have experienced and have exposed you to become the person who you are at that moment. And those things can be very different depending on the person, but they all matter to who you are. You start aging from day zero, and all of the things, the accumulation of experiences over time affect your trajectory towards aging. So here's a great example when we're looking at heart disease and the possible trajectories across the life course. So someone who in early childhood maybe had things like obesity and weren't very physically active, and maybe genetic predisposure to that might be the red trajectory. So you get someone who in early adulthood already has elevated blood pressure, and up into close to middle age and older middle age, they may have had some organ damage to their heart, and by the time they're into middle age, they already have cardiovascular disease. That's very different than the person who had the average life course experience and was exposed to some of the same things, but maybe had a little bit healthier lifestyle, and they may not develop cardiovascular disease ever, but it would definitely be an advanced age. As opposed to the green, which is the ideal life course, someone who started from day one and had healthy behaviors and maybe less exposure to some of the risks, both biologically, psychologically, and socially over time, they have a much better trajectory. An ideal life course trajectory that keeps them away from having even elevated blood pressure, so they certainly won't get to cardiovascular disease. So that is just an illustration of what we're interested in a life course perspective. We don't want just a snapshot of aging and who that person is when they walk in the door. We want to think about that person as what things across their life course have they been experiencing and exposed to that have brought them to the point that they are now, and what things maybe do we need to do at the point that we're at to perhaps change that trajectory a little bit if that's what we want to do. All right, the third major concept that you will be utilizing across a semester is to unpack ageism. So this is a quote from Frances McDormand about the idea that past 45 we become almost a joke in society, and she's lamenting for a time when we didn't have this around, where we could just age and it wasn't an issue. And I don't know when that was, because ageism has been around for a very long time. But the idea here is that every concept that we come up against, whether it's caregiving or long-term care or healthcare policy or social security, all of those things are affected by ageism, because ageism is very strong in our society. And we have to unpack what is the ageist message that is clouding the real truth of aging. So I'll give you an example. A lot of times people are afraid of growing older because they don't want to lose their minds, quote unquote, because the ageist rhetoric in our society is that when you grow old, it's inevitable that you're going to become cognitively impaired, or you're going to lose your mind, or you're going to not be able to think like you did. So what's the truth behind that? It's our job as budding gerontologists to be able to say, well, let's unpack what is the ageist message around that and find out what the real truth with a capital T is about cognitive aging. So the real truth, which we'll talk about a bit in later chapters, is that there are some normal age-related declines in maybe processing speed or other types of cognitive processes. But the reality is that people don't, quote unquote, lose their minds. You usually have to have a pretty progressive disease process, and a minority of older adults have those. And the majority of older adults retain their ability to do everything they want to during the day: job, social relationships, personal pursuits, with their normal age-related changes that they have cognitively. So that's an example of unpacking ageism that we will want to do across a semester, is figure out what's the actual truth of aging in this concept, and what is society telling us the truth is that we become afraid of or want to run away from, or become sort of complacent about, and therefore, our actions, society's actions, policies, etc., aren't what they should be, because we're believing what the truth that ageism has given to us versus the truth of actual aging. So that's part of it. So now we've sort of talked over all of these different spheres that you're going to use. So in order to think like a gerontologist, every aging issue that we come up against, we're going to talk about the biopsychosociocultural aspects of that. We're going to talk about the life course perspective and what kinds of things across a life course have brought people to these experiences. And we're also going to talk about the ageism message in this topic and how to unpack that and find the real truth of it. So part of that is going to be done well, the ageism part, with your text or the book that you're reading, the Aging Manifesto Against Ageism by Ashton Applewhite. This is a great job of going over these different topics that we're talking about and really pointing out what the ageist rhetoric is and how that's impacted that topic. But the other ones will also try to directly point out as the semester goes along and think about the biopsychosociocultural model and the life course perspective as well. So how are we going to get you to be thinking and acting like a gerontologist? Well, as we went over in the syllabus, there's a lot of different activities in the course, and each one of them is designed to be able to help you get closer to that goal. So you're going to have to read some things and learn and understand some of the basic concepts, some of the advanced concepts in aging and what they are. You've got to have the knowledge first. And you're going to have to discuss some of those topics or evaluate and be a little critically minded and discuss them with your classmates in a group discussion format and when we do our live or in person. You're also going to have to learn how to apply the knowledge that you're picking up in the tasks in the course. So those 5 tasks that you have to do across the semester. You're going to be using the knowledge that you're gaining, the critical analysis of them, and applying them to a problem in aging. And your final project, you're going to be doing all of those things. You're going to be learning about a problem that you've chosen. You're going to be evaluating how that problem currently is and what we can do about it, and applying your knowledge to be able to address that problem. So that is how we're going to get ourselves closer to thinking and acting like a gerontologist in this course. All right, so that's my last video for the week. Make sure that you are looking over the other videos. And also for next week, you're going to be having more readings. So you'll be doing the readings for week 2 next week. So open up that module once it gets, once you're through with the stuff that you're doing for week 1, check out what you're supposed to be reading, watching, and doing. And I will see you next week.